Michael Collins, killed on our last operation.
Harold Berkey. Frank Bowmore and James Ridley.
X-ray platoon had the unlucky honor of being the worst shot up platoon to serve in Vietnam. We had 4 of the team members killed. The rest of us are wounded 2 to 3 times each. My dad worked in the oil field in '62. He went overseas working on a gone 2-year contract. Well, when that contract was up, he came back to the States, told Mom that he was leaving Nigeria and going into Algeria, North Africa, and that her and the boys could go. The only problem with that, the schools only went up to like the 8th grade. I was in high school. My older brother was about to go off to college, so me and the older brother stayed in Liberty. But prior to that, Mama was a nurse. I have an older brother and a couple of younger brothers, but I was the one that was chosen for housework. And Mama would get up early, and I'd put the brothers on the school bus to go to school and make sure they had their lunches with them and clean the house when I got home from school. And one Saturday, a movie came on, and it was a movie about the United States Navy frogmen. Richard Widmark starred in it. I was about 13 at the time, so I didn't clean house that morning. Mama was a little ticked off when she got home, so I hadn't done a dang thing, but I pointed to that TV and I told her that's what I was going to do. So she left me alone and let me finish watching the movie that day. I had a first cousin killed in Vietnam in '67. Probably 8 or 9 months after that, my parents were back here in the States for a visit, and we kind of hung out with Mom and Dad, but I was gone all day long. So when I showed up that afternoon, Mom wanted to know where I was. I told her I had gone to Houston and joined the United States Navy, and she slapped me harder than I had ever been slapped in my life. So I went off to the Navy. Mom and Dad went back to Africa. I went to boot camp in San Diego, went to an A school in San Diego. Then I checked into the Navy's underwater demolition training. And that's where I met your so-called Uncle Dave Perry for the first time. Dave was enrolled in class 52. I got enrolled in class 52. I got medically backed up to class 54 and graduated with class 54. But Dave and I had remained friends that whole period of time, even up to today's date. And at that time, Navy frogmen and SEALs had 2 separate roles from each other. To get in the SEAL team, the instructors at training picked who they thought would want to go to SEAL team, and then we were asked if we wanted to go to the underwater demolition teams or go on to SEAL team. And about 7 of the guys out of my class were asked to go to SEAL team, and all 7 of us did. Mom's side of the family and my dad's side of the family, most everybody had been in the Navy, where all of our feelings felt. So that's where I went. 3 days before I was to graduate training to become a Navy frogman, I got a telephone call from an uncle that my mother had been killed in a car wreck in Africa. So instead of graduating with my class, I flew home to a funeral service in Liberty and then flew back to Coronado, California, probably 8, 9, 10 days later, and met up with the rest of my guys from my class that went to SEAL Team 1. And class 54, when I got enrolled into it, there was not quite 400 of us that started that class. And we graduated a little bit over 50. And I remember the first day I ever walked into the training unit. I walked into the front door, There was a chief, his name was Chief Jones. I can't remember what Jones's first name was. And I had a little tummy that I've always had. Chief Jones stuck his fist about 8 or 9 inches up inside my stomach and looked at me and said, "Well, Butterball, you won't be here long, will you?" And so I fooled him. I stayed, did what I needed to do, and I never was a Olympic runner. And in the training units back then, the instructors would cut 6, 7, 8 guys that were the last 6 or 7 or 8 guys in a run. And I would always be the first one they would cut, or the last one. They'd start with the last guy and work forward. So they would work up to me, and that's where it'd get cut. And so we would have to run extra on the beach. The instructor that did this all the time, his name was Vincent Olivera. And Vincent would regularly tie a rope around each of us, tie it to the bumper of his Jeep, and pull us up and down the beach. I know one particular day, this one guy tripped and fell. Olivera screaming at him, he tripped and fell. He tripped and fell. He tripped and fell. Olivera told him, he said, "If you fall one more time, I'll run over you." Well, we didn't make it probably 20 more yards, and this kid fell again. He threw his arms straight up in there, and he just screamed, "Run over me, Olivera." And one of the other boys I went through training with was named Wally Jimenez. Wally was of Spanish descent. Everybody loved Wally. Wally's dead now. Died of natural causes a number of years ago, but we had the obstacle course that had to be ran 2 or 3 times a week under a certain given time period. And they had what they call a slide for life on it. And this telephone pole must have went 40 foot up in the air, and the rope stretched way out to another telephone pole that was probably only 30 foot in the air. And you would either lay down on the rope and slide to the other one, or you would hand crawl to the other end of the rope. The instructors would stay on the ground, they'd throw rocks at you. Well, they knocked Wally off the slide for life 2 or 3 different times that day, and I'm going to say at least 4. And the last time, he told me, he said his arms were killing him. He needed to go to the doctor there on base, and Olivera told him, "You got 2 choices." He said, "Right after the slide for life, we got a 4-mile run." He said, "Now you can go on this 4-mile run, then go to the doctor, or you can quit now and go to the doctor." So Wally went on the 4-mile run, went to the doctor there on the Naval Amphib Base, and he came back with both arms in a cast. And he got rolled back a couple of classes and eventually finished all of the training, and Wally stayed in the underwater demolition teams. One of the things we used to do we'd go down near the Tijuana border, and it was like walking through a sewer patch down there. And we'd swim in the mud, and we'd play in the mud. You couldn't tell who anybody was because they'd make you dive head first and swim through the mud. Somehow I busted my lip at one of the days down there, and it was busted pretty good. And Olivera screamed, "Who's bleeding?" I said, "Me." He said, "Who's me?" I said, "Majors." He said, "Come up here, Majors." So I got out of the mud, I walked up on the bank where he was standing, and he knocked me flat on my butt with a boat oar and told me to lay there. He said, "Open your mouth." I opened my mouth, and he filled my mouth full of sand. He said, "It'll quit bleeding here in a minute." And, you know, there are a lot of horror stories of what goes on in training. And believe it or not, a lot of them are true stories. You know, you remember going through it, and you remember the first couple of days. And then after that, you become oblivious to what went on. Back then, you got very, very little time to fall asleep, Okay, 6.5 days worth of crap. It was night. We were in our IBSs, which is a small rubber boat. Be about 7 of us in the boat. 3 guys on each side paddling, and 1 guy acting as the rudder in the back. And the boats would stay pretty close to each other so that the instructors could keep an eye on us in the dark. And I remember one of the guys, he said, "Anybody got change for it?" And this was like day 4 or day 5 of no sleep. He said, "Anybody got change for $1?" And we were all just second, change for $1. He says, "There's a Coke machine over there and I need to get a Coke." So he just stood up and walked right out of the boat into the bay. And he was definitely hallucinating. When Hell Week was actually over, the instructors, I was married at the time, so the instructors would call the wives or the girlfriends and tell them they could come pick us up. And the ladies knew exactly where the compound was, what it looked like, and where the parking lot was. So one of the instructors told me to go over and lay down on the grass right next to the asphalt parking lot. And my wife, when I finally did wake up, she said she'd been sitting there 4 hours. I wasn't probably 6-7 feet from the car. And by that time, your body is swelling up with what they call elephantitis back then, or whatever you want to call it. And she could not even recognize that was me laying on the ground. Your lack of sleep, and all you were doing was running, swimming, and your body just fought it off as bad as it could, and that's what happened. There were either right under or right over 300 that quit in my training class. So they would, right there on the edge of the training base, they'd have to pile a little bunch of sand up like a grave and put their helmet on it. And so we got to watch that little graveyard grow and grow and grow and grow. And then go ring the bell, I quit. Cold water is what made a majority of the people quit. The Pacific Ocean is cold. And when you go through a winter class without a wetsuit, and you've just got a pair of fins on and swim trunks, and you're swimming in it, or one of the things they used to love to do, they'd make us interlock our arms with each other, and we would sit this deep in the ocean for hours and just shiver and shake. And that's where the guys would quit. They just couldn't handle the cold. And the instructors would always bring a couple of active duty SEALs in to help them monitor all of us. And Richard Solano was one of them that came in. Richard got killed in a helicopter crash in Vietnam. James Gore was one of the others that came over. He also got killed in the same helicopter crash that Solano got killed in. But when they showed up, and they'd only been in teams maybe a year and a half at this time, so they knew what Hell Weeks were like. And they would keep their pockets full of almond joys and other little bits of candy. So when the instructors wasn't looking, they would slip us candy to eat. And during Hell Week, we ate 4 meals a day. The chow hall would open up, and I mean, we ate 4 large, healthy meals a day. And they'd give you about 5 minutes to eat. Oh yeah, a lot of us go to sleep eating. Back then, I don't know how it is today, but dive was either the second or the third phase of training. And you spend a lot of time in the water. Back then we were swimming with double hose regulators, which had a mouthpiece in, and it had 2 hoses that went back to your air tanks. And Oliveira loved me because I'd gone to secretarial school as a Navy yeoman. So he called me his titless wave. I was a man as a secretary instead of a woman. And so that caused me to get picked on quite a bit. We'd be in the boat fixing to dive into the San Diego Bay, and Oliver would come over and tell me to open up my mouth. And at all times, he had a large wad of chewing tobacco in his mouth. He would take it out of his mouth, tell me to open my mouth, and he'd put that water tobacco in my mouth. He said, as soon as this dive's over, I want my tobacco back, and you better have it in your mouth. So every time you took a breath, you're sucking down the air, and the water tobacco's moving, and as you exhale, it's moving. And he was serious. When I got out of the water, he wanted his water tobacco back. Last things you do, one of your big runs was a 16-mile run from SEAL Team 1's headquarters down to the Tijuana Mexican border. Oliveira ran it backwards, outran us all, with a water tobacco in his mouth, cussing us the whole time. It wasn't dark, it was black. Yeah. And at night there's little phosphorus critters in the water. And so as you're swimming on a night swim, it's like sparkling, like lightning bugs lightning up underwater. And it's pretty eerie, but it's really good looking too. The other thing that Oliver would do to me, if he didn't give me a wad of tobacco to put in my mouth, say on a 3-mile compass swim, he would take my face mask away from me. And when we did a compass course, there'd be 2 of us. And you had a tack board that had a compass hooked into it and everything, and you already knew where you were going and the distances you were supposed to go. And it would take, say, 30 to 40 minutes to an hour to do one of the compass swims. I'd do it. I did a lot of them with no face mask. The pool's good because they're teaching you how to survive, and whether your ankles get tied together and your hands get tied together and you got to tread water for the next 30, 40 minutes and you're just thinking, bouncing off the bottom of the pool, coming back to get a breath of air, slowly sink back down and come up. But the worst one was when you had to save an active drowning victim. Chief Allen was one of the instructors, and Chief Allen was a big man. He was in the pool as my active drowning victim that I had to get in the pool, bring him to the edge of the pool, and get him out of the pool. And he dang near drowned me that day. And to my best recollection, I did get him over to the edge of the pool, but it was me who got picked up and put out of the pool. You'd be in full dive gear. 2 or 3 or 4 instructors would be underwater in dive gear. They'd swim up behind you, and they would actually turn your valves off to where you wasn't getting any oxygen. You had to be able to reach back there, turn it back on. They would take your mouthpiece out. You'd have to clear it, get it back in. They would jerk your face mask off. So underwater, you're having to put your face mask back on, get all the water out of it, and continue swimming while they're continually harassing you the whole time. One of the guys that I went through training with, Fred Smith was his name. Fred could hold his breath right at 5 minutes. He had been an Olympic swimmer, and he could just go down, lay on the bottom of the pool, and stay there forever. And I'd be pushing a minute and a half, and then I was wanting to get out. When I got back from burying my mother, I was immediately checked into X-ray platoon, and there were probably already at that time 7 or 8 guys picked out for it. Lieutenant Michael Collins was the officer in charge. He was a Naval Academy graduate. Our second officer in charge was not an officer. He was an E9 Navy chief, but he was fixing to make his 7th combat tour to Vietnam as a Navy SEAL. The next guy under him had done 6 tours of Vietnam. This was going to be his 7th. And 2 or 3 of the other guys had already done 1 or 2 tours. and there weren't but like 4 of us, that this was going to be our first tour of duty in Vietnam. X-ray platoon had the unlucky honor of being the worst shot up platoon to serve in Vietnam. We had 4 of the team members killed. There were only 14 of us, so 4 was killed. The rest of us are wounded 2 to 3 times each. When we got to Vietnam, well, prior to even going to Vietnam, we'd go to Nowlin, California. SEAL team had a great training base on the Salton Sea. Had a Viet Cong village there, and the Salton Sea was real large with different tributaries coming in and out of it, so our boats could operate in the tributaries, and we could actually work in an environment very similar to a thick mangrove jungle, whether it was the grass we were in, the brushes we were in, or the bamboo that grew in and along the lake. But it was a good training place. There was a bar there at an island on the Salton Sea. The name of it was the Luck of the Irish Cove. Every SEAL platoon up to this point would spend time in and out of the Luck of the Irish Cove. They had different photographs of different SEAL platoons hanging on the walls, 8 by 10 photographs, and some larger. Bill and Maxine, I don't remember their last name, were the owners of the bar. After we got shot up so bad, X-ray platoon was the last SEAL platoon to get its photographs hung up inside that bar. We flew out of North Island, which is just right down the road from SEAL team, and we all mustered. Frank Bomar was the chief. He was second in charge. We stored our gear. The wives and girlfriends were there to say goodbye. Frank Bomar was there with his 2 daughters. His wife and his 2 daughters. His wife's name was Nora. His oldest daughter was named Nora. Nora at that time was somewhere about 20, 22 months old. The younger daughter, I can't remember her name. She was still an infant when we flew out, and she had been born with a hole in her heart. When Frank got killed, he was buried at Point Loma Cemetery. It was Rosecrans National Cemetery. And right about a year later, the baby daughter had died from heart problems, and she's buried on top of her dad there at Rosecrans Cemetery. So on one side it's got Frank's inscription, and on the other side of the tombstone it's got his daughters. We packed up, got on that plane, made a trip to Hawaii. The plane stopped in Hawaii, and we made stops at, and I can't tell you the exact order, but we stopped at Midway, Wake, Guam, the Philippines, and then on into Vietnam. We were in Vietnam maybe a week when we finally got all of our gear unpacked down at Ben Tre. Ben Tre was probably 60 miles from Saigon. The war was, one of the main breakouts of the war originally was in Quien Hoa province. Ben Tre was the capital city of the province. We got stationed on a army base, maybe 150 Army guys on it at the most, and then 14 of us Navy SEALs. Like I said, this Army base was almost right downtown Ben Tre, so when we got there, first thing we did, boss told us to get our weapons ready, to meet him on the banks of the river, and we're on a very large tributary off the Mekong River where this base sat. And my boss doesn't tell the Army, he doesn't call the South Vietnamese Police Department, which wasn't but about 3 blocks from us. And we just go down and we stand on the river banks, the 14 of us, with all of these very good automatic weapons. And we just download into the river to make dang sure all of our weapons were working. Just a few minutes later, here's the white mice. That's what we call the police people. Not only did the white mice show up, but here comes the Army major who was in charge of this Army base, wanting to know what in the world was going on. He tried to implement us also in the mustering every morning, just like the Army guys does, and that just wouldn't float with the way we worked. So he insisted that Lieutenant Collins have us muster every morning on the grinder with his troops. So we mustered on the grinder one time, every one of us butt naked, and that ceased any requirements for us to muster anymore. We met our boat guys in Vietnam. We had not met them up till this point. You know, we knew what kind of boats we'd be operating out of, but we did not know what crews would be there. And it was the same for the boat crew. Half of them didn't realize what Navy SEALs were. They just got assigned to Boat Unit Support 1 and sent to Vietnam and met us, and we went to operate. All 14 of us, plus 3 or 4 of the boat crew, went out on our big boat on a night trip up and down some of the tributaries around Ben Tre. The boat was powered by large engines that were in silent compartments on jet jacuzzi ducts. Now, standing close up to it, you could actually hear the motors running. When it was on step, you could hear the boat running, but not near what you actually think one of these boats noise could make. And it had a canopy on it, a tarp canopy over it. The 14 of us could stay covered under the tarp. It really did not have any armor plating protection around it, except where the coxswain actually sat and drove the boat. So we go up one small tributary and hear a little noise, and the next thing we know, we're hearing crap bounce off of the tarpaulins, rolling into the riverbank, and grenades are going off. So we back out and got back down to base. None of us were hurt. We never actually saw the enemy. One of the SEALs that I was operating with, this was going to be his second trip to Vietnam. His first name was Maury. This scared the crap out of Maury. So he went into the boss's office and said he quit. Sent him back to the States. So Maury got sent back to the States and kicked out of SEAL team. Dung Vang Ah. He was born and raised in Kim Hoa Province. He had been involved with the NVA. The NVA accidentally killed his parents, and it upset Ah tremendously. He switched sides and started working with Navy SEALs. He was like God does. He knew Kim Hoa Province like the back of his hand. So when we went into the woods, he was always walking point, even in front of our point man. I would be 5, 6, 7 yards in front of our point man. And it was just a supremely fantastic relationship we had with him. We all loved him. Close to Christmas time, we were getting packages from home. And I even slept in the same barracks that we slept in. Had his rack in there right close to mine. And I'd gotten a whole bunch of Christmas boxes a week or two before Christmas. And I came in. I was sitting in the middle of our bed opening my Christmas presents. And he was having a good time. It did not upset me. If he were alive today and I knew where he was, he'd be living in my house. That's how much I thought of him and how much the other guys thought of him. Gordon Clisham and several of us have tried to trace him down over the last 20 years, but we haven't had any results in doing it. There were 4 secret zones in Vietnam. One of them was down by us in our province. It was called the Tan Phu Secret Zone. A secret zone was an area set aside by our government. They deemed there wasn't anybody there except bad guys. We did not have to follow the rules of engagement in the secret zone. According to how it was set up, they were bad guys. If we saw them, we could shoot them. And we spent a lot of time in the Tan Phu Secret Zone. On one of our first daylight operations, which we did not do very many of them. We went in Tan Phu. We wanted to get a good first-hand look in an area that we would be operating in at night. All 14 of us went in the woods, plus we walked all day long in Tan Phu. We saw hundreds upon hundreds of footprints. We never saw a living soul. And a couple of days later, once we were back at base, the boss and I had picked up a Chuhoi at the Chuhoi Center that we were going to run some intel with and see if we couldn't work up a decent operation in Tan Phu. Well, when they brought him into our office area, we had a large map of Binh Tre and Kim Hoa province on the wall, and he just started running his fingers down through the area of the Tan Phu secret zone and just yakking. I finally stopped him and told us what the Chuhoi was saying. He said that we walked real close to a battalion of North Vietnamese soldiers. They saw us. We did not see them. They did not open fire upon us because they knew in their minds that 14 guys would not come in to that area by themselves. And so what they thought we were a large point element for a battalion or division size army movement. They tried to get out of our path. They left a couple of the guys to follow us all day to see what we were doing. This Chuhoi was one of the guys that followed us all day long. So we were just lucky we didn't get our butts handed to us that day. North Vietnamese had a bounty out on anybody that could kill a Navy SEAL. And depending on who you were, whether you were a young Navy SEAL operating in Vietnam or if you had done 5 or 6, 7 tours in Vietnam and were good at your job, these bounties ran anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 on each one of us that they could kill and prove who we were. So we did have a valued market on our head in Vietnam. Harold got killed and his older brother was a Navy SEAL. His older brother's name was Sam. Sam was 3 or 4 or 5 classes before us. So Sam had already made several trips to Vietnam. This was Harold's first trip. He was 19 years old, bald-headed, had a Fu Manchu. If you went to guess his age, you'd have put him at 30, 35 years old. That's just how Harold looked. In Harold's mind, he was 5'8", 190 pounds of twisted steel and sex appeal. And the day Harold got killed, we got caught in a real bad ambush. And they had us pinned down for probably an hour. They opened up on us from almost directly in front of us, and we suppressed that fire. They opened up on us from the right side, and we suppressed that fire. They opened up on us behind us, and we suppressed that fire. And they opened up on the left of us, and we suppressed that fire. And during the initial outburst of the shooting, Harold took a round in the upper part of his right leg. It came out below his groin. It went into his left leg, hit the pelvic bone, and bounced into his abdomen. And Harold bled to death within probably 20 seconds at the most. So we're getting shot at. The boss and I are working on Harold. We couldn't really find except the one spot in the hip where the thing went in. So we did a little bit of heart massage on him, but all we're getting is the gurgling of the massive amount of blood that's in his abdomen. Trigg got shot in the leg. Clarence Betts got shot up severely that night also. And the only way we ever got out of the ambush is before we ran out of ammunition. The boss got us all ready. We gathered our dead, our wounded, and we charged the ambush back toward the river to where our boat was waiting on us. They shot at us the whole way back to the boat. One of the boat crewmen named Gene Hicks, we called him Buddha, he knew that we were in a bad firefight because the boat wasn't too far away. They could hear what was going on. He knew that the firefight had gone on long enough that we were just about to be out of ammunition. He grabbed an M16 and came off that boat with a whole bunch of ammunition looking for us. And luckily we actually ran into him. He had probably only gotten about 100 yards toward us from the boat. As we lifted Harold to put him up on the bow of the boat, we lifted him up feet first, and the boat crew grabbed him and pulled him up. And as his head flopped over and it landed on my shoulder, and all of the blood in his abdomen poured down the front of me. And sitting in the boat that night, I went and got back in the boat, and I had Harold's head rested in my lap. And the Vietnamese guy that worked with us, he spoke a little bit of broken English, and he said, "Harold dead?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Harold, good man. He bought me lunch yesterday." Now, prior to me sitting down and putting Harold's head in my lap, as we got on the boat, we started returning fire back into the woods. And they got the boat turned around, and I don't really remember exactly what set me off with the guy manning the twin 50 that was on the starboard side of the boat. But I remember throwing him away from the gun. I grabbed it and I just started blasting into the jungle with it. And when Chief Betts, he was what they call a plank owner SEAL team. He was one of the original SEALs ever to be commissioned as a Navy SEAL. And I don't remember exactly which tour duty this was, either his 6th, 7th, or 8th tour even for clearance. His leg had been so shot up. By the time he healed, he was medically discharged from the Navy, and the leg that got severely shot up was about 2 inches shorter at that point. Trig took around through the ankle. He stayed in country and stayed off the ankle for about a week and then went back to work with us.